The Stoic Blueprint. How to detach from someone when you have children together. Part 1. Accept what cannot be undone. There is a pain that few people understand until they live through it themselves. A relationship can end in a single conversation, but when children are involved, the connection does not disappear with the goodbye. You may no longer share a home, a bed, or a future together, yet you still share one of the greatest responsibilities life can give you. The Stoics believe that peace does not come from escaping reality, but from learning how to stand firm within it. Many people believe detachment means loving your children less, but nothing could be further from the truth. True detachment is not the absence of love, but the refusal to let another person's choices control your thoughts, your emotions, and your purpose. You can be a devoted parent while accepting that the romantic relationship has reached its end. That is where freedom begins. Today, we will follow two fathers who face the exact same challenges after the end of their relationships. David and James both love their children more than anything in the world, and both must communicate with the mothers of those children every week. They begin from the same place, carrying the same heartbreak and asking the same questions about what their future will become. What separates them is not what happens to them, but how they choose to respond. Lesson 1. When the phone rings. One afternoon, both David and James receive a phone call from the mother of their children. She says the conversation is about changing the weekend schedule, but after only a few minutes, she begins asking personal questions about their lives and bringing up arguments from the past. Neither man expected the conversation to turn this way, and both immediately feel old emotions trying to pull them backward. This is the same moment, but it will lead to two very different outcomes. David feels his heartbeat quicken as memories of the relationship flood back into his mind. Instead of focusing on the schedule for his children, he begins defending himself against accusations that no longer matter, and trying to explain why things happened the way they did. The conversation grows louder, both become frustrated, and what should have taken 5 minutes lasts nearly an hour. When the call finally ends, David spends the rest of the evening replaying every word in his mind, instead of enjoying the time he could have spent preparing for his children. James feels the same emotions rising inside him, but he pauses before speaking. He quietly reminds himself that the purpose of this call is to care for his children, not to relive a relationship that has already ended. He calmly answers the questions that concern the children, politely declines to argue about the past, and respectfully brings the conversation back to the schedule. When the call ends, he puts his phone away, returns to his evening, and his peace remains intact because he refused to surrender it. At first glance, these two conversations seem almost identical, but the outcomes could not be more different. David allowed the discussion to become about the relationship, while James kept it centered on his responsibility as a father. One walked away emotionally exhausted, and the other walked away emotionally steady. The difference was not the phone call itself, but the discipline each man brought to it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that if another person's actions disturb your mind, it is your judgment of those actions that deserves examination. He understood that life constantly presents situations beyond our control, but our character is revealed by how we respond to them. James could not control the direction the conversation tried to take, but he could control whether he followed it. That is the first step toward real detachment. The lesson is not to become cold or unfeeling. The lesson is to recognize that your children need a parent who can remain calm, even when emotions are invited into the room. Every unnecessary argument steals time and energy that could have been invested in becoming the father your children deserve. The strongest parent is often the one who refuses to fight battles that no longer serve a purpose. Lesson 2. When your child talks about the other parent's new relationship. A few weeks later, David and James experience another moment that many parents quietly fear, but rarely admit hurts them. During a drive home after school, each of their children casually mentions that their mother has introduced them to someone new. The children are not trying to cause pain, and they are simply sharing what happened during their day. The situation is exactly the same for both fathers, but once again, two completely different outcomes begin to unfold. David feels as though someone has knocked the air out of his lungs. He forces a smile for the sake of his child, but inside he is overwhelmed by jealousy, anger, and questions that have no answers. The rest of the drive becomes silent because he is no longer listening to his child, and he is listening only to the painful story playing inside his own mind. By the time they arrive home, his child can sense something is wrong, even though no one has said another word. That evening, David cannot stop thinking about what he heard. He imagines conversations that may never have happened, creates scenarios he cannot prove, and begins comparing himself to someone he has never even met. His mind becomes a courtroom where he is both the prosecutor and the defendant, and every thought finds another reason to reopen a case that life has already closed. Instead of enjoying dinner with his child, he becomes emotionally absent because he is fighting a battle inside his own head. James hears the same words from his child, and the pain is just as real. He takes a slow breath before responding, because he understands that his first responsibility is not to protect his own feelings, but to protect his child's emotional safety. He smiles gently and says, "Thank you for telling me, and I hope you had a good day." His child immediately feels safe because there is no pressure to choose sides or hide the truth. Later that evening, James allows himself to acknowledge the sadness, instead of pretending it does not exist. He reminds himself that grief is a natural emotion, but building a permanent home inside that grief is a personal choice. He cannot control who his former partner welcomes into her life, but he can control the atmosphere inside his own home. Because of that decision, his child continues to experience one stable, peaceful place where love is never tied to conflict. The Stoics never taught people to deny painful emotions. They taught that emotions should be recognized, understood, and guided instead of obeyed without question. Pain is a visitor that arrives without permission, but suffering often remains because we continue inviting it to stay. Wisdom begins when we stop serving the emotions that no longer serve us. David spends the following week watching social media, asking mutual friends unnecessary questions, and searching for information that changes nothing. Every answer he finds creates two new questions, and every question pulls him farther away from the father he wants to become. His child notices that he seems distracted, impatient, and emotionally unavailable. Without realizing it, David has allowed another person's life to become the center of his own. James makes a different decision. Instead of watching someone else's life, he invests his attention in building his own. He helps his child with homework, prepares dinner together, takes a walk through the neighborhood, and laughs at stories from school, because he understands that today's moments will one day become tomorrow's memories. The life he is building is no longer defined by what he lost, but by what he continues to create. The philosopher Epictetus taught that freedom begins when we stop attaching ourselves to what is outside our control. Another person's choices belong to them, just as your response belongs to you. If your happiness depends upon controlling someone else's decisions, then your happiness will always remain fragile. When your happiness comes from living according to your values, it becomes far more difficult for anyone to take it away. By the end of the month, the difference between the two fathers has become impossible to ignore. David is still measuring his life against someone else's decisions, while James is measuring his life against the man he was yesterday. David wakes up hoping his past will change, while James wakes up determined to improve his future. They both experience the same pain, but only one of them allowed that pain to become permanent. Your children are always watching how you respond to life's hardest moments. They may never remember every word you say, but they will remember whether your home felt peaceful or filled with bitterness. They will remember whether you taught them resilience or resentment, and they will carry those lessons into their own relationships someday. The greatest gift you can give your children is not a perfect life, but an example of how to rise after life has broken your heart. Lesson 3. When they try to pull you back into the past. Several months pass, and life begins to settle into a routine for both David and James. Their children are adjusting to the new normal. School is back in session, and the daily exchanges have become predictable. Then one afternoon, the mother of their children brings up mistakes from the relationship during what was supposed to be a simple conversation about a school event. Once again, both men face the exact same situation, but the choices they make lead them down two completely different paths. David immediately feels the need to defend himself because he wants her to finally understand everything he did for the family. He reminds her of the bills he paid, the sacrifices he made, and the countless times he put everyone else's needs ahead of his own. The conversation slowly turns into an argument about a relationship that no longer exists, and neither person walks away feeling heard. By the time the call ends, David has spent another hour trying to rewrite a chapter of his life that has already been finished. The argument stays with David for the rest of the day. While he is eating dinner with his child, his mind is still replaying every sentence that was spoken. He thinks of better responses he wishes he had given, imagines winning arguments that will never happen, and wonders if she finally understands his point of view. Although he is physically sitting across the table from his child, emotionally he is still trapped inside the phone call. James hears the same accusations, but he notices something important before answering. He realizes that proving himself will not change the past, and defending every criticism will not create a better future. He calmly says, "We're here to discuss our child, and I'm happy to do that, but I'm not going to revisit our relationship." He speaks respectfully, keeps his voice steady, and returns the conversation to the school event that needed to be discussed. When the conversation ends, James does not continue it inside his own mind. He understands that just because someone invites him into an emotional battle does not mean he has to accept the invitation. He puts his phone away, finishes preparing dinner, and spends the evening laughing with his child instead of arguing with memories. The peace he protects today becomes the peace his child experiences tomorrow. Many people believe closure comes from getting the other person to admit they were wrong. The Stoics believe that closure comes from no longer needing another person's agreement in order to move forward. Waiting for someone else to validate your pain gives them control over your healing. Real freedom begins the moment you stop asking someone else for permission to be at peace. David continues looking backward because he believes understanding the past will finally heal him. James looks forward because he understands that healing is built through today's decisions rather than yesterday's explanations. One man spends his energy trying to change another person's opinion, while the other spends his energy becoming a stronger father. Those daily choices quietly shape two completely different lives. The philosopher Seneca warned that we often suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. David keeps reopening emotional wounds every time he revisits old conversations, and each replay makes the pain feel new again. James refuses to relive what cannot be changed, so the wound slowly loses its power over him. Time alone does not heal every wound, but wisdom teaches us to stop reopening it. Imagine your child watching both fathers from a distance. One parent is constantly frustrated, always trying to explain the past and never quite able to enjoy the present. The other parent is calm, respectful, emotionally available, and fully engaged in the moments that matter most. Without saying a word about Stoicism, one father is already teaching it through his example. The greatest victory after a broken relationship is not making the other person regret leaving. The greatest victory is becoming so emotionally grounded that your peace no longer depends on their opinions, their choices, or their approval. When your children look back years from now, they will remember the parent who gave them stability instead of bitterness. That is the kind of legacy no one can take away. Lesson 4. When your child is caught in the middle. There comes a moment in many co-parenting relationships that tests a parent's character more than any argument ever could. It is the moment when a child innocently repeats something they heard from the other home, and suddenly your emotions begin demanding an immediate response. Neither David nor James expected that day to arrive, but for both of them, it did. The situation was identical, Yet the outcome depended entirely on the choices they made in the next few minutes. One Saturday afternoon, both fathers picked up their children for the weekend. As they were driving home, each child quietly said, "Mom said you don't care about us the way you used to." The words were spoken without anger, without judgment, and without understanding the weight they carried. They were simply the words of a child trying to make sense of two different worlds. David felt a rush of anger that he could barely contain. He immediately began defending himself, explaining everything he had sacrificed, everything he had paid for, and every promise he had kept over the years. Before long, he was criticizing his former partner in front of his child, hoping that if his child understood the whole story, they would finally know who was right. The child sat quietly, overwhelmed by emotions they were never meant to carry. The rest of the weekend felt different. Although David tried to make up for the conversation with games, movies, and laughter, his child remained unusually quiet. The child was no longer thinking about having fun. Instead, they were wondering whether loving one parent meant betraying the other. James heard the exact same words from his child. The pain hit him just as deeply because no loving parent wants their child to question their love. He took a slow breath, smiled gently, and said, "I know hearing different things can be confusing, but you never have to choose between your parents." Those few words immediately lifted a burden from his child's shoulders. James did not criticize the child's mother. He did not defend himself with a long speech or try to convince his child that he was the better parent. Instead, he simply said, "The most important thing I want you to know is that I love you, and nothing will ever change that." His child smiled, leaned back in the seat, and the conversation naturally moved on to soccer practice and homework. What happened afterward revealed the true difference between the two men. David spent the weekend trying to repair the emotional damage created by one conversation. James never had to repair anything, because he refused to place his child in the middle of an adult conflict. The Stoics believed that wisdom is shown not only by what we do, but also by what we choose not to do. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to speak words that cannot be taken back. Sometimes protecting another person's peace is more important than proving your own point. That kind of restraint is not weakness. It is strength under control. Epictetus taught that every situation presents us with two opportunities. One opportunity is to react according to our emotions, and the other is to respond according to our principles. Emotions often demand immediate action, but principles invite patient wisdom. The parent who follows principles usually discovers that today's self-control becomes tomorrow's trust. As the months passed, David noticed that conversations with his child about the other household became increasingly uncomfortable. His child began choosing words carefully, afraid that an innocent comment might upset him again. Without intending to, David had taught his child that honesty could create conflict. James experienced the opposite. His child spoke freely about school, friends, vacations, and time spent with both parents because there was no fear of causing an argument. James had created a home where honesty felt safe, and that safety strengthened the bond between father and child with every passing month. Your children are not asking you to win the battle with your former partner. They are asking, often without saying a word, for one place where they can simply be children. They need a parent who is emotionally strong enough to protect them from conflicts they never created. When you become that parent, you are no longer just moving on from the relationship. You are becoming the example your children will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Lesson 5. When they ask you for a favor that has nothing to do with the children. One of the hardest tests after a relationship ends does not come through anger or insults. It comes through a simple request that seems harmless on the surface, but quietly pulls you back into the role you worked so hard to leave behind. Many people confuse being a good parent with becoming a permanent problem solver for their former partner. The Stoics would remind us that compassion without boundaries eventually becomes self-destruction. One Thursday afternoon, both David and James received the same phone call. The mother of their children explains that she needs someone to watch the children while she handles a personal matter. But before ending the call, she begins asking for help with errands, favors, and responsibilities that have nothing to do with the children. The request is wrapped in guilt, obligation, and memories of everything they once shared. The situation is identical, but the responses could not be more different. David immediately says yes, because that is what he has always done. He tells himself that maybe helping will finally make her appreciate everything he has done over the years, and perhaps she will begin seeing him differently again. He rearranges his own schedule, cancels plans he was looking forward to, and spends the day solving problems that no longer belong to him. When he returns home that evening, he feels exhausted, frustrated, and strangely disappointed because nothing has changed except the amount of energy he has lost. Deep inside, David is not helping because he freely chose to. He is helping because he is afraid of what might happen if he says no. He fears being called selfish, bitter, or uncaring. So he sacrifices another piece of himself to avoid disappointing someone who is no longer his partner. Every time he ignores his own boundaries, he quietly teaches himself that his needs matter less than everyone else's. James receives the exact same request. He gladly agrees to care for his children because they are, and always will be, his responsibility. When the conversation turns toward favors that have nothing to do with the children, he respectfully says, "I'm happy to help with anything involving the kids, but the rest you'll need to figure out another way." His voice remains calm, his words remain respectful, and there is no anger behind his decision. The conversation becomes uncomfortable for a few moments because boundaries often surprise people who have never heard them before. James listens without arguing, refuses to apologize for being respectful, and repeats his answer without raising his voice. Eventually, the conversation ends, and although the other parent may not like his answer, James walks away with something far more valuable than approval. He walks away with self-respect. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that if it is not right, do not do it. And if it is not true, do not say it. Saying yes when your heart is screaming no is neither honest nor healthy. A boundary spoken with kindness is far more honorable than a promise made out of guilt. Character is measured by honesty, not by endless sacrifice. Over the next several weeks, David notices that the requests become more frequent. Because he never established a boundary, people naturally continue expecting him to solve problems that are not his responsibility. He becomes overwhelmed, resentful, and emotionally drained. Yet he still struggles to say the one word that could begin changing his life. That word is no. James experiences something different. At first, there are a few more requests because people often test new boundaries to see whether they are real. James responds with the same calm consistency every single time. And eventually, those unnecessary requests become less frequent because his actions match his words. Respect grows where consistency lives. The Stoics never taught people to become cold-hearted. They taught people to act from virtue instead of emotion, and virtue includes wisdom as well as kindness. Helping your children is an act of love, but sacrificing your peace to maintain someone else's comfort is not love. It is fear wearing the mask of kindness. David still believes that being needed gives him value. James has learned that his value comes from his character, not from constantly rescuing other people. One man continues chasing approval, while the other quietly earns self-respect. Although both men love their children equally, only one has learned that healthy boundaries make him a stronger father instead of a weaker one. Imagine what your children learn by watching these two fathers. One teaches them that love means ignoring your own needs until there is nothing left to give. The other teaches them that kindness and self-respect can exist together without conflict. Those lessons will shape the way they build friendships, marriages, and families long after they become adults. The day you stop confusing boundaries with selfishness is the day you begin living as the man your children already believe you can become. Lesson 6. When you realize your child is watching everything. There comes a moment when every parent faces a truth that cannot be ignored. Your children are not only listening to your words, but they are studying your actions every single day. They are learning what love looks like, what respect looks like, and what strength looks like by watching how you respond to life's hardest moments. The example you set today may become the blueprint they follow for the rest of their lives. One Friday evening, both David and James arrive at the same school basketball game to watch their children play. The gym is crowded with parents, teachers, and friends, and neither man expects anything unusual to happen. A few minutes before the game begins, the children's mother walks into the gym with her new boyfriend. The situation is exactly the same for both fathers, but the lesson their children learn will be completely different. David feels anger rising the moment he sees them together. His attention immediately shifts away from the basketball court and toward the people sitting across the gym. Instead of watching his child warm up for the biggest game of the season, he spends the next 20 minutes wondering why life seems unfair. His child keeps looking into the stands, hoping to see encouragement, but notices that his father is distracted by something else. As the game continues, David cannot hide the emotions on his face. Every time the new couple laughs together, his frustration grows stronger. He barely applauds when his child scores because his mind is focused on a battle that has nothing to do with the game. By the time everyone leaves the gym, he remembers very little about his child's performance. James notices the same couple walk into the gym. The pain is real because healing does not mean becoming emotionless. He quietly reminds himself why he came to the gym in the first place. He did not come to watch another adult's life. He came to support his child. James smiles, waves to his child during warm-ups, and cheers louder than anyone else in the building. Every rebound, every assist, every basket becomes the center of his attention, because that is what matters most. His child leaves the court knowing one thing with complete certainty: Dad was there for me. When the game ends, both fathers drive home with very different memories. David remembers where everyone was sitting, what they were wearing, and every painful emotion he experienced. James remembers the smile on his child's face after making the winning shot, and the excitement they shared on the ride home. The same event created two completely different memories, because each father chose a different place to focus his attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. He understood that your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess, because wherever your attention goes, your life soon follows. David gave his attention to what he could not control. James gave his attention to what mattered most. The Stoics believed that every distraction asks the same question: will you invest your energy in something that builds your character, or will you waste it on something you cannot change? That question appears every day after a broken relationship. Your answer determines whether you remain trapped in yesterday or begin building tomorrow. Months later, David struggles to remember many of the special moments he shared with his child because his mind was often somewhere else. James remembers almost every game, every birthday, every school concert, and every ordinary afternoon they spent together because he was fully present. Presence is one of the greatest gifts a parent can give. Your children will not measure your love by how many arguments you won or how many times you defended yourself. They will remember who showed up, who listened, who encouraged them, and who made them feel safe. Long after the pain of the breakup has faded, those memories will remain. The Stoic does not win by changing another person's life. The Stoic wins by refusing to let another person's choices steal the moments that belong to the people he loves most. Lesson 7. When you stop waiting for them to change. One of the greatest traps after a relationship ends is believing your life cannot truly begin until the other person changes. You wait for an apology that may never come, for an explanation that may never be given, or for regret that may never be felt. While you are waiting for someone else to move, your own life remains standing still. The Stoics taught that the future belongs to the person who acts, not the person who waits. One Tuesday afternoon, David and James both receive a text message from the mother of their children. The message is polite, but it contains no apology, no sign of reconciliation, and no indication that the past will ever be different. Both men stare at the same words on the same screen. yet each man sees something completely different. The message itself has no power until they decide what it means. David reads the message over and over again, searching for hidden meaning between the lines. He wonders if the short response means she is upset, if the smiley face means she misses him, or if the delayed reply is a sign she's thinking about coming back. His imagination begins writing a story that reality has never confirmed. By the end of the evening, he has spent hours chasing possibilities instead of living his own life. The next morning, David checks his phone before getting out of bed. He hopes another message has arrived that will finally answer every question running through his mind. Nothing has changed except his own anxiety, yet he continues giving his emotional peace to circumstances he cannot control. Every day he waits for her to change is another day he postpones becoming the man he wants to be. James receives the same message and feels the same curiosity. He smiles to himself because he recognizes the temptation to search for hidden meaning where none may exist. Instead of creating a story inside his head, he simply answers the question about the children and places his phone back in his pocket. The conversation ends exactly where it should have ended. After work, James goes to the gym, helps his child finish homework, cooks dinner, and spends the evening talking about school and future goals. His attention stays on the people standing in front of him instead of the possibilities living inside his imagination. He understands that the life he is building today is worth far more than the life he keeps replaying in his mind. Every decision pulls him farther away from the past and closer to the future. Weeks pass, and the difference between the two fathers becomes even clearer. David is still measuring his happiness by someone else's actions, while James measures his happiness by the promises he keeps to himself. David hopes tomorrow will finally bring change from another person. James creates change through his own daily discipline. Epictetus taught that the person who seeks peace must stop depending upon what belongs to someone else. Another person's thoughts, emotions, and decisions have never belonged to you. Your integrity, your discipline, and your response have always belonged to you. When you understand that truth, waiting begins to lose its grip. One afternoon, both fathers attend another school event for their children. David spends much of the event watching the parking lot, wondering who will arrive with whom and what it might mean. James spends the same event laughing with his child, meeting teachers, and celebrating another milestone in their life together. They stood in the same place, but only one father was truly present. Children notice where your attention lives. They may never say it out loud, but they recognize when your eyes are focused on the past instead of the moment you are sharing with them. Every time James chooses presence over obsession, he strengthens the bond with his child. Every time David chooses obsession over presence, he unknowingly weakens that same bond. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that each morning brings a new opportunity to live according to virtue. Yesterday's disappointments cannot become today's excuse for neglecting the people who need you most. Your children deserve a parent who is fully present, not one who is emotionally trapped in memories that cannot be rewritten. The day you stop waiting for another person to change may be the very day your own life finally begins. Lesson 8. When you forgive without reconciliation. Many people believe forgiveness means reopening a door that was closed for a reason. They think forgiving someone requires trusting them again, welcoming them back into their lives, or pretending the pain never happened. The Stoics saw forgiveness differently because they understood that peace comes from releasing the weight of resentment, not from pretending the past was acceptable. Forgiveness is something you give yourself before it becomes something you give anyone else. One Saturday morning, both David and James attend their child's birthday party. Family members are laughing, children are running through the yard, and for a few hours, everyone tries to focus on celebrating instead of remembering the past. During the party, the children's mother walks over and begins speaking to each father, as though nothing difficult had ever happened between them. The situation is exactly the same, but the responses lead to two completely different futures. David immediately feels hope begin to grow inside him. Every friendly smile feels like a sign that the relationship might be coming back together. and every kind word becomes proof that maybe this is a new beginning. Instead of enjoying the birthday party, he spends the afternoon analyzing every conversation, every glance, and every laugh. By the time the party ends, he has built an entire future inside his mind that exists only in his imagination. Over the next several days, David keeps replaying the party. He wonders if he should send another message, ask to meet for coffee, or tell her how he still feels. When she responds politely but keeps the conversation focused on the children, disappointment crashes over him all over again. The hope he created becomes another source of pain because it was built on assumptions instead of reality. James experiences the same friendly conversation, but he sees it through a different lens. He is grateful that they can be respectful because he knows that kindness makes co-parenting easier for their child. He enjoys the moment for what it is, without expecting it to become something more. When the party ends, he leaves with appreciation instead of expectation. That evening, James reflects on how far he has come. There was a time when every smile would have filled him with false hope, but now he understands that civility is not the same as reconciliation. He no longer mistakes peace for a promise. Because of that wisdom, he sleeps well instead of wondering what every word might have meant. Seneca taught that the person who clings to anger keeps reopening the same wound. Every day you choose resentment, you give yesterday another opportunity to steal today's peace. Forgiveness does not erase the past, excuse betrayal, or remove accountability. It simply ends the power that yesterday has over your heart. David believes forgiveness means restoring the relationship. James understands forgiveness means restoring himself. David keeps waiting for another chance with someone else. James uses every new day as another chance to become a better father, a better man, and a better example for his child. As the months pass, the children notice a remarkable difference. David still becomes emotionally shaken whenever the past finds its way into the present. James remains calm because he has accepted that his peace is no longer tied to another person's decisions. One father is still asking, "Why did this happen to me?" while the other has begun asking, "Who can I become because this happened?" Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the best response to hardship is to let it improve your character instead of hardening your heart. Every painful experience carries two possibilities. It can make you bitter, or it can make you wiser. The choice belongs to you, every single day. Imagine your child looking back 20 years from now. They will not remember every disagreement or every difficult conversation between their parents. They will remember the parent who chose dignity over revenge, peace over bitterness, and wisdom over pride. That example will become part of the foundation on which they build their own family. True forgiveness is not giving the past another chance to control your future. True forgiveness is finally becoming free enough to walk forward without carrying yesterday on your shoulders. Lesson 9. When your child wants both parents to be together again. There are a few moments that test a parent's heart more than hearing a child say, "I wish we were all one family again." Those words are innocent because they come from love, not from manipulation. A child is not asking you to relive your pain. A child is simply expressing a dream that feels safe in their heart. One Sunday evening, David and James are both driving their children home after a wonderful weekend together. The laughter has been constant, the memories have been beautiful, and neither father expects the conversation to change. Then, almost without warning, each child quietly says, "I wish you and Mom could get back together." The silence inside both vehicles suddenly becomes heavy. David feels his emotions take control almost immediately. He looks at his child and says, "I wish that could happen too, but your mom chose a different life." As the conversation continues, he begins talking about the relationship, the mistakes that were made, and how much he sacrificed to keep the family together. His child listens carefully, carrying emotions that were never meant to rest on young shoulders. When David arrives home, he cannot stop thinking about what his child said. He spends the evening imagining what life would look like if the relationship somehow started over. Instead of appreciating the wonderful weekend they shared, He ends the day grieving a future that no longer exists. His child's innocent wish becomes another reason to remain attached to the past. James hears the exact same words, and they touch his heart just as deeply. He smiles gently and says, "I understand why you would wish that, because every child loves having both parents together." He pauses for a moment before continuing. "Even though we don't live together anymore, you will never have to wonder whether you are loved by both of us." His child smiles because the answer brings comfort instead of confusion. The drive home continues with laughter instead of sadness. James asks what his child enjoyed most about the weekend, talks about the upcoming school week, and reminds them about the fishing trip they have planned next month. He chooses to build new memories instead of mourning old ones. By the time they reach home, his child feels secure because love was never questioned. The Stoics believe that reality deserves acceptance, even when acceptance is painful. Fighting against what has already happened only multiplies suffering. Accepting reality does not mean you stop loving what once was. It means you stop allowing yesterday to prevent you from living today. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that we should welcome each moment as it comes, rather than demand that life unfold according to our wishes. David continued asking life to return what it had already taken away. James accepted that one chapter had ended and committed himself to writing a better one. The same painful moment produced two entirely different futures, because each father chose a different response. As the years passed, the children remembered these conversations in very different ways. David's child often felt responsible for his father's sadness and became hesitant to bring up difficult feelings. James's child learned that honesty was always welcome because their father could handle the truth without placing emotional burdens on them. One father unintentionally asked his child to help carry his grief, while the other carried his own with quiet strength. The greatest gift you can give your children is not the impossible promise that everything will return to the way it once was. The greatest gift is showing them that love can remain strong even when life changes direction. Your children do not need perfect circumstances to become emotionally healthy. They need one parent who consistently chooses wisdom over resentment, hope over regret, and peace over pride. The Stoic parent understands that although a family may no longer live under one roof, love, stability, and character can still live in every choice they make. Lesson 10. David's turning point. David sat alone after dropping his children off, staring at a phone that had become heavier than it had ever felt before. Every message, every unanswered question, and every argument replayed in his mind like scenes from a movie he had watched too many times. For the first time, he asked himself a question that made him uncomfortable. What if the person he had been trying hardest to change was never the person who needed to change at all? James drove home after the same exchange with the children's mother, and he felt the same sadness settle into his chest. He wanted answers just as badly as David did, and part of him still wished life had turned out differently. Instead of reaching for his phone, he reached for his journal and wrote down the only question that mattered. What can I control today? The following week, both men attended their child's school program. David spent most of the evening watching his ex from across the room, wondering whether she noticed him or regretted anything that had happened. Every smile she shared with someone else felt like another wound that refused to heal. His child looked into the audience more than once, searching for his father's eyes. But David barely noticed because his attention was fixed somewhere else. James attended the same program with the same memories and the same pain. He chose a seat where his child could easily see him, smiled every time their eyes met, and applauded every achievement with genuine pride. When the program ended, his child ran straight into his arms with a smile that made every difficult decision worthwhile. James realized that peace is often found by giving your attention to the people who are present instead of the people who have already walked away. After the program, David saw James loading folding chairs into a volunteer trailer. There was no bitterness on James's face, no performance, and no attempt to prove anything to anyone. David finally asked the question he had avoided for months. "How do you stay so calm after everything that's happened?" James smiled quietly before answering. "I stopped measuring my life by whether she changed, and I started measuring it by whether I did. The day I accepted that I couldn't control another person's choices was the day I finally became responsible for my own." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience instead of opinion. That conversation stayed with David long after he drove home. For months, he had believed that peace would arrive when his ex apologized, admitted she was wrong, or became the person he wanted her to be. He suddenly realized he had built his future around someone else's decisions instead of his own. The prison he had been trying to escape was one he had unknowingly built inside his own mind. The next morning, David received another message from his ex that quickly shifted from discussing the children to criticizing the past. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as old habits urged him to defend himself one more time. Then he remembered James's words and closed the conversation without arguing. He replied only with the information that concerned the children and put his phone away. Nothing about the situation changed that day. His ex remained the same person she had been the day before, and the past remained exactly where it belonged. The only thing that changed was David, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. He had just made his first true Stoic decision, not because it changed someone else, but because it changed the man he was becoming. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. David finally understood that wisdom was never about winning an argument or changing another person. It was about mastering the one mind he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And with that single decision, his transformation truly began. Lesson 11. The Reward of Detachment. Several months passed, and for the first time since the relationship ended, David noticed something unexpected. The silence that once felt unbearable had become peaceful, and the constant need to know what his ex was doing slowly disappeared. He still thought about the past from time to time, but those memories no longer controlled the direction of his day. Instead of chasing closure from another person, he had begun creating it within himself. James had walked this path long before David, and his daily life reflected the quiet confidence that comes from consistent discipline. He no longer measured success by whether conversations with his former partner went smoothly or whether she approved of his decisions. He measured success by the kind of father he became each day and by the example he set for his children. That simple shift had given him a peace that no outside circumstance could take away. One Saturday morning, both fathers arrived at the soccer field to watch their children play. David noticed his ex laughing with friends on the opposite sideline, and for a brief moment the old feelings tried to return. Instead of staring across the field or wondering what she was thinking, he smiled at his child warming up for the game and waved with genuine excitement. Without realizing it, he had just chosen the present over the past. James stood only a few yards away, watching the same game unfold with quiet gratitude. He saw David cheering instead of comparing, encouraging instead of overthinking, and being fully present instead of emotionally absent. James said nothing because he understood that real growth never needs an audience. Some victories are too personal to celebrate with words. After the game, David's child climbed into the car wearing a wide smile and said, "Dad, I heard you cheering every time I touched the ball." Those simple words meant more than any apology David had spent months hoping to hear from his ex. He finally understood that the moments he had almost missed could never be replaced. His greatest reward was not getting the relationship back. It was becoming the father his child needed. On the drive home, David reflected on everything that had changed. The world around him looked almost exactly the same, but the man looking through the windshield was completely different. He had stopped trying to control another person's heart and started taking responsibility for his own character. That single decision had transformed every part of his life. James later met David for coffee, and the conversation felt different than it ever had before. They spoke about their children, their goals, and the future, instead of old arguments and broken promises. James smiled and quietly said, Peace isn't the reward you receive at the end of the journey. Peace is what grows every time you choose discipline over emotion. David nodded because he no longer needed convincing. He had lived the truth of those words himself. The Stoics believed that true freedom begins the moment you stop depending on other people to determine your happiness. David finally understood that freedom had never been waiting for his ex to change, or for the past to make sense. Freedom arrived the day he accepted reality, embraced responsibility, and chose to master his own mind. That was the reward of detachment, and it was worth more than anything he had spent years trying to hold on to. Listen. 12. The Stoic Blueprint. A year had passed since David began changing the only person he could truly control. The life around him was not perfect, and many of the circumstances he once wished would change had remained exactly the same. What had changed was the man standing in the middle of those circumstances. Peace had quietly replaced the chaos that once ruled his every decision. James watched that transformation with quiet satisfaction, because he understood something David was only now beginning to appreciate. Stoicism had never promised an easier life, a restored relationship, or freedom from disappointment. It promised something far greater than those things. It promised the strength to remain steady regardless of what life placed in front of you. One afternoon, both fathers attended another school event for their children. Their former partners were there. Family members filled the room, and memories of the past lingered in the background just as they always had. The difference was that neither man allowed those memories to dictate the present. Their attention belonged to the children who were creating new memories right in front of them. As the event came to an end, David caught himself smiling without forcing it. He wasn't pretending to be okay, and he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He simply realized that happiness no longer depended on someone returning, apologizing, or becoming the person he once hoped they would be. For the first time in years, he felt complete without needing anything from the past. James quietly placed a hand on David's shoulder as they walked toward the parking lot. He didn't offer another lesson because none was needed anymore. David had stopped learning Stoicism through words and had started living it through his actions. That is where real wisdom is found. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that our lives become what our thoughts continually dwell upon. David finally understood that he had spent years feeding fear, regret, and false hope, while James had been feeding discipline, gratitude, and purpose. Both men experienced pain, but only one chose to let that pain become a teacher instead of a prison. That single choice changed the direction of an entire life. So now the question is no longer about David or James. The question belongs to you. When life disappoints you, when someone walks away, when your heart is broken, and when the future feels uncertain, which path will you choose? Will you continue chasing what you cannot control? Or will you begin mastering the one person who has been waiting for your attention all along? The Stoic Blueprint has never been about becoming cold, emotionless, or distant. It is about becoming disciplined enough to feel every emotion without allowing those emotions to become your master. It is about setting boundaries without hatred, loving your children without conditions, accepting reality without surrendering your character, and building a life that no longer depends on another person's choices. That is the crown every man has the opportunity to earn. If this story challenged the way you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below and tell us which man you recognized more in yourself, David or James, and what Stoic principle you're going to practice this week. Join our community of crowned Stoics by subscribing for more lessons that help you master your mind, strengthen your character, and become the man you were created to be. Until next time, remember this: master your mind, wear the crown.